Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dan Glickman. I'm a senior fellow here at the Bipartisan Policy Center, and I want to welcome everybody to our leadership series in the name of Bob and Elizabeth Dole, both proud partisans who, over long careers, overcome great adversity, showed confidence and creativity to dignified differences and build conditions that have really changed our country for the better. And in this series, we call on leaders from local and state politics, business, advocacy, education, and the arts to help us understand characteristics and circumstances that generate true leadership. And we have a true leader today. He is my friend, Bill Novelli. He's founder of the Business for Impact program at Georgetown University, where I've had the opportunity to speak to his class, and he's even invited me back, so I guess I did okay. And that's at the university's McDonough School of Business. He is the author of Good Business, The Talk, Fight, Win Way to Change the World. And that's what he and Jason Grumet, my friend, moment. Bill has had this incredible career. He was CEO of AARP, organization of 40 million people, ages 50 and older, that I fit right in that category and have for a very long time. He was founding president of the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, executive vice president of CARE, one of the great NGOs, humanitarian organizations of the world. And of course, he's the co-founder and president of the famous PR firm Porter Novelli. He began his career in the marketing department of Unilever, and he later served as director of advertising and creative services and the Peace Corps. So this amazing, amazing career of doing so many things. And I'm not going to say that he can't keep a job, because that's not true. Everything he's done, he's built upwards. And I think that it's incredible. He serves on the board of the BPC Action Network, the American Cancer Society, the Coalition to Transform Advanced Care, the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, the Capital Caring Health, and Strategic Partnerships. But in this book, he draws on his lessons from business and life, and they're really important lessons that I think we all can learn, from government to business to the private sector. And so I'm just proud to be his friend and proud to introduce this event. And now I'm going to turn it over to my friend, the president of the BPC, Jason Grumet.
Well, thank you, Daniel. Really delighted to be here with you and with Bill Novelli. So, Bill, we have 35 or 40 minutes, and this has been a really great experience reading this book, because I thought I knew you pretty well, but you've just done a remarkable number of things, and some of them, frankly, quite surprising, which I'm going to try to unpack with you a little bit. But look, what I want to try to do is kind of three things. I want to talk just a little bit about, why'd you write this book? It is not a small endeavor, and you made some clear choices in what you thought were important themes you wanted to discuss. I want to talk broadly about leadership, which again, I think is really the fundamental core of what you're sharing with us. And then talk a little bit about the now, right? I mean, this idea of corporations thinking broadly beyond just their shareholder needs has now become not just kind of an idea, but an absolute mandate. And if you look at what's happening with state election laws and campaign finance issues and racial equity issues, I think, your book, you basically were describing ESG 30 years before any of the rest of us ever heard about it. So I want to really kind of draw you into that conversation. But so just to start out, why'd you write this book?
Well, first of all, Jason, I want to thank you for having me. And I want to especially thank Dan for all that hyperbole. As far as the book is concerned, way back in my day, the idea was get a job with a big company, climb the ladder, earn a pension, get into the corner office with some leather furniture, and retire. And of course, that's not the way the world is today. And I was at Unilever. I was a brand manager. I was doing well. And then I went to a hot New York ad agency back in the Mad Men days. And I had this problem, Jason, and my problem was that at the end of every day, I was saying to myself, where is the social relevance in all this? And I wasn't finding any. And so that was the beginning of really trying to change a career and trying to do things that I thought had social impact. And I learned some important lessons along the way, and that's why I wrote the book. I wanted to offer up those lessons, and one
So,
of them is that if we're going to make progress, today's social environmental issues are way too big for endless combat. We need to get everybody at the table, and I'm including even tough industries like tobacco, the pharmaceutical industry, food and beverages, all these people. We need to talk and fight if we're going to win. And my lesson is that there are no permanent enemies. There's only permanent principles and values. And I wanted to get that across.
okay, well, so that is a great foundation, and as you know, kind of also core to the ethos of the BPC. But so I want
Yeah.
to go back to the mid 20s Novelli, not mid 1920s, but mid age 20s. Competitive guy. I mean, look, you played college football. Who knew? You're selling soap. You're apparently pretty good at it. Why wasn't that enough, right? So people ask me, like, why did I start the Bipartisan Policy Center? And my honest answer is, well, I was a middle child, right? I mean, I've kind of been doing this, all my life. Why wasn't selling soap satisfying to you? I mean, what is it about your history that made you feel like you wanted something different?
Well, I think the real reason why you started the BPC is because you wanted to make a difference. And that's exactly how I felt. And of course, it was early on. And I had this sort of like an epiphany. And my thought was that I could apply the same principles, the same marketing principles that I was using for packaged goods, and I could apply those to health and social issues. And when I figured that out, and I figured out I could make a career out of it, I was really on my way. So my first stop was the Peace Corps. And back in those days, Jason, everybody loved the Peace Corps, all the host countries, just like they do today. But what they were saying was, we need fewer art history majors. No offense to anybody. We need more people who understand agriculture, nurses, MBAs, physicians, and we need more people who look like us, the countries where the Peace Corps was working. So helping to reposition the Peace Corps was a big step for me in the right direction.
So your book talks about a lot of experiences, and as Dan said, your resume reads like a millennial's, right? I mean, the variety of different things that you undertook, of course, over a reasonably storied career is really pretty compelling and makes for some very, very good storytelling. You talk a lot about character, and it's easier to have character if you're surrounded by people who feel similarly. You found yourself in a number of experiences over your life where, you were in some rough company. I am particularly charmed to share the story of your abiding friendship with Chuck Colson and the Committee to Re-elect the President, formerly known as CREEP, in the Nixon years. How'd that come about? Talk a little bit about that experience. It kind of was your first, step into politics, and, you were a unique voice in that whole experience.
Well, when I talk about I was part of the November group. I helped to set up the in-house ad agency for the re-election of President Richard Nixon. And when I tell my students about that today, they just look at me like, is this guy George Washington? I mean, it's ancient history. But for political people like you and for people like me and Dan Glickman, it's real. And I did that because the White House knew about my marketing background. I was at the Peace Corps. So they asked me to do this. And I had this idea that, if marketing is as robust a discipline as I think it is, I could apply it to politics. So I helped to start the November group, and we were part of or connected to CREEP. And the lesson there is watch out what acronyms you use to describe yourself. And I got engaged with the re-election program from an advertising and promotion standpoint. Chuck Colson was a dirty tricks guy in the White House, and I had to contend with him. And we all know that he later got religion and became a very religious leader. I learned a lot from that whole period. And I even, as you know from the book, I even served as a witness at the trial of G. Gordon Liddy, who passed away quite recently. So that was an experience where I learned something about ethics. I learned something about dealing with negative people. And I think I can say I learned something about leadership.
So why don't we start to turn towards this question of leadership. I think if you go back to the Watergate example, it's generally the cover up more than the crime, right? I think that a lot of people find themselves in situations where they've made a mistake, and the natural inclination is to figure out how to not get caught, right? The embarrassment of whatever you have done wrong. Talk about some leaders that you've worked with who have navigated those kinds of challenges, because I think in retrospect, it always seems obvious, but the courage to acknowledge a mistake in the moment strikes me as one of the more important characteristics of good leadership.
Yeah, I think it really is. If you look at companies today, Jason, a lot of companies do what was done back in those days and is done all the time, which is put on intense pressure from the top. So whether it's Wells Fargo or Volkswagen or whomever, pressure from the top is often why people make ethical mistakes. And what are we going to do about that? How do you withstand that? How do you keep your moral compass in the face of all that? That's one of the true lessons that we learn as leaders. And I think the most important lesson is that leadership really, really matters. It doesn't matter what sector, leadership matters. And somebody once said that leadership is the cause and all else is effect. And I think that's true. And when I was at AARP, it's a big organization. And I used to say to myself, about 100 decisions a day are made in this organization that affect AARP's future. And I'm making maybe 5 of them. So who's making those other 95? And the answer, of course, is teams and team leaders, which is why teams are so critical in leadership. I mean, if you're going to have a vision, you're going to rally people around that vision. You need great teams. And if you're going to have great teams, you have to listen to those people and put your ego aside. And that's another really important leadership lesson, I think. And then, you and I were talking about this earlier. There are a lot of bad leaders out there, and there are a lot of poor managers. And it seems counterintuitive, but we can learn from them too. We can learn how not to do things, how to avoid the wrong thing. So, and Colin Powell taught me a good lesson, which is that you can lead from the middle. You don't have to be the CEO to be a leader. You can create teams, you can lead teams, you can have a vision for your team. And so leading from the middle is important.
The idea we joked about that someone needs to create a center for worst practices, I do agree would be very helpful to the understanding of success.
Yes,
so,
yes, indeed.
Another aspect of leadership is risk-taking, strategic risk-taking. And I was struck by a comment that you revealed in your book from Walt Disney when trying to decide, he and his brother, how do we start building Disney World or Disneyland, I guess at that point. And I guess Walt's brother said, first we build the hotels. And Walt said, no. First we build the castle. Now you obviously included that in your book because as kind of metaphor for vision, it says a lot. But what is that balance between risk-taking, being willing to be the leader, and then empowering your teams and creating that kind of collaborative culture?
Well, I believe in risk-taking. And I've taken a few risks in my time. Of course, they need to be warranted risks. You don't just take wild, crazy gambles. And that story about Walt Disney saying, first we build the castle, what that's meant to express is that, leaders tend to have vision and managers tend to do things right. And his brother, who said, let's build the hotels first, he was a manager. And another example I like to use is Winston Churchill, who was probably one of the greatest leaders of all time, and who had a reputation for being a really lousy manager. A lot of people can do both. A lot of people can do one or the other. And of course, we need both. We need leaders and we need managers.
So let's kind of go into one of the, you've led a couple of really consequential efforts. I think the campaign for tobacco-free kids, certainly among everything you've done, I think certainly kind of resonates as a vision that then is in fact implemented in a way that just changes the world. And again, in retrospect, it all seems kind of, lovely and easy, but there were a lot of moments where you had to make some very difficult decisions that clearly not only put you in conflict with the tobacco industry, but the harder decisions, right? Put you in conflict with your own coalitions. Talk about that
Yeah,
experience for you and what you learned.
yeah. The tobacco wars, as I call them, are not over, for sure. We're still fighting those wars, and one lesson from that is you can never let down your guard. The tobacco industry wanted to make peace. They wanted certainty in their business, and we wanted to drive down adult and kid smoking. So we negotiated. The attorneys general from the various states, led by Mike Moore from Mississippi, and the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, went into these negotiations with the tobacco industry. And it leaked. It ended up in the Wall Street Journal, and all hell broke loose. And the public health community was divided. The Congress was divided. The Clinton administration was divided. Even our campaign was divided. And the old Sesame Street thing about it's not easy being green. It's not easy being out front with everybody shooting arrows at you, I can tell you. And we persevered, and it took a long time. But finally, we got FDA jurisdiction over tobacco. But yet, look at the situation today, Jason. We have vaping. The industry has this new technology they call heat don't burn. The tobacco industry, the tobacco companies are doing the same thing in low-income countries that they were doing here 25 and 50 years ago. So the war goes on. And you got to be, you got to have a tough skin. You got to be tough enough to fight these battles.
Talk a little. So one of the big debates we're always challenged with is this kind of question of incremental progress versus revolutionary change. A lot of people we work with look at the challenges facing the country, and they are profound, and basically say, don't take little steps. It will kind of remove the constructive tension from the issue, kind of hold out for the big transformational win. And I will reveal my own bias, which is that I think most revolution, if you look at it carefully, was actually a series of evolutionary steps that came together to make consequential change. But where do you come down on that question of the right size of the fight?
Well, when it comes to today's political situation, I come down on your side. I don't think we're going to have a revolution, and I hope we don't. I think what we need is we need incremental progress. You did your book on City of Rivals, and you said we need to build trust. And a politician I admire, a member of the BPC, Olympia Snow, said we need to build civility. And I think all those things are true, but we are in a real toxic mess. And our way out of it, I don't think is a revolution. I think our way out is we've got to figure out how to make incremental change. And Jason, one of the things I talk about is crossing the aisle. So we know people like Bill Frist and Olympia Snow, they had the courage to cross the aisle. And we have to have the courage as individuals, you and I and Dan Glickman and everybody else. I have members of my own family that I cannot talk politics with. And so I don't need to argue with them over who won the last election. What we need to do is we need to figure out how to talk about things across the country where we can find agreement. Maybe it's climate change, maybe it's infrastructure, maybe it's education. But we need to cross the aisle, and we need to make a difference so that incrementally we can get out of this mess.
So I want to now turn a little bit towards the kind of crises of the moment, and there are, of course, many. Before I do, I should just note for our audience that you can pose questions that I will be able to then share with Bill through the live chat functions on YouTube or on Facebook. You can also tweet questions with the hashtag BPC Live. And so please, you can start queuing those up, and the talented staff at BPC will sort them into some coherence. So Bill, we've talked a lot about, business. And again, I say this with flattery, but also authenticity. Like, you kind of stumbled into this ESG thing 25 years before anybody else was talking about it. Now you cannot have a conversation that does not, one way or another, question the role and the changing role and obligations of corporations. And so I want to just ask you just to think about the trajectory of that. Do you see, were there inflection points over the last couple of decades that you think brought us now to this larger imagination of shareholder capitalism and, power with purchase and purpose. How did you watch that debate unfold?
I think it was evolutionary. I don't think it was the kind of thing where we rejected, the only purpose of business is to make a profit. We didn't reject that overnight. It took a fair amount of time. And my alma mater, Unilever, I think, did some real pioneering work in this area. But now, Jason, it's a growing trend. And companies are building social and environmental strategies into their core businesses. And this is really enlightened self-interest. I mean, they see that they can improve their financial performance, they can gain a competitive edge, they can attract talent, like these MBA students that I have at Georgetown. They can serve communities. And the bottom line of this is that they can improve their bottom lines. They can improve their profit picture as a consequence of social value. So that's the secret sauce. It's people, profit, planet. I think that's where things are going. Now, not all companies are getting this, of course. There are plenty of companies who don't get it. And companies can do well and do poorly and misbehave all at the same time. And it's our job, I think, to hold them accountable and to help them move along that continuum. But now, of course, things have gotten very political.
So the orbit of corporate responsibility has been broadening a lot. I think that there was certainly a time where folks were thinking about whether a corporation was acting responsibly in the lane of its own kind of economic focus. Then there was a discussion about the extent to which corporations are thinking about their own immediate communities. Now, obviously, with global climate change, there is a universal aspect to this. And recently, the polarization that is dominating our political debate has called corporations into what for them are extremely difficult situations because the issues are framed so challengingly that you almost have to pick a side to enter the room. What do you see corporations? I mean, do corporations have actual obligation in your mind to be part of those larger political debates on election reform, for example?
Well, I think you expressed it well. I think that's what we've come to. We've done a good job in this country of politicizing everything, from wearing masks, to climate change, to everything in between. And companies have gotten caught up in this. It was like 3 months ago that they suspended donations to politicians and PACs in the wake of the assault on the Capitol and against lawmakers who were voting against the Electoral College certification. That was January. They were trying to take stands against gun violence, climate change, racial injustice, other kinds of things. And their customers were demanding it. Their employees were demanding it. And now things have gotten worse and worse and worse. So now we have companies taking stands against, for example, in Georgia, the state law on election practices, on bathroom bills, on transgender kids. And there's real peril in this. Companies are in a tough spot. But I don't think they're going to back away. I know they see risk. But it's a demand on the part of their employees and their customers and whatever. And these CEOs are feeling not just heat, but they're feeling courage as well. So I think that they're going to weigh the risks. They're going to try to do the right thing. But I think they're going to try to continue to stand up for what they think is best.
So let's pick one of these issues. For example, the PAC giving question. Pausing is easy. It's consequential, but it's a moment, it's crisis communication, let's pause. The conversation now among a lot of the companies we work with is, well, so how do we now move back into this conversation? I think, again, our view is the problems are big and we need corporations to show positive action, not absence. That, and this shows a lot about where we've come, but, corporate PAC money is actually some of the most transparent, accountable, cleanest money in our entire political system, right? So the idea that we are pushing corporations out of the system so that then the less responsible, less transparent, dark money flows in is not necessarily, I think, in the nation's interest. But so, how would you advise a corporation that has paused about what it should be thinking about in terms of re-engaging?
Well, it's not an easy question. Corporate PACs are important in our democracy. Now look at Congress. Now they're going to reinstate earmarks, and everybody used to hate earmarks, but people are saying no. This has to do with how our democratic process works and can work better. So there are things that, on the face of it, seem wrong or seem inappropriate, but we need to really look at them very carefully. I guess I tend to be a bit of an idealist. I think that gerrymandering is one of the biggest problems we have in the country, and I think that companies have to weigh in on that. Yes, they can give money to politicians. They probably ought to give it to both sides, but for the most part, companies have a role to play in our democratic system. I like to see them playing a role. I like to see companies weighing in, and not just weighing in on lower corporate taxes or the kind of ads we see in the newspaper with pharma. They can weigh in on both sides. And companies have smart people. They have a real important democratic role to play.
So we've talked about ESG a few times, and the G in ESG is governance, which up until recently has focused on kind of the internal governance practices of a company, how one runs their board and board diversity, and the kind of transparency in their decision making. It seems like there's a little bit of a jailbreak now, and the G is governance as it relates to the democracy writ large. It's tough, challenging stuff. Other than having wonderful partners like the Bipartisan Policy Center and other think tanks. I think we're seeing a lot of our corporate partners finding themselves in territory that they just don't know anything about. They just don't. Election laws are pretty complicated. The states are all different. Do you feel like corporations have the appropriate responsibility and bandwidth to become actually expert in all these different issues?
Well, I'm glad they turned to BPC and get some policy education. That's for sure. But no, they don't have the bandwidth. I think that most corporate boards are behind the curve. They're only beginning to figure this stuff out. And of course, one of the hottest issues today is the issue of race equity, of diversity, not just on the board, but throughout the company. You might have seen that article recently by the woman who was an engineer at Google and wrote about sexual harassment. They're learning about a lot of things that previously used to just be taken for granted. So I think C-suite people are educating themselves. The boards of these companies are being educated, but this is all for the good. This is an awakening, and we need this.
So one of the key debates right now is how one understands the appropriate role of corporations and the government in navigating these policy questions. It is clear that corporations are now being called upon, and I think helpfully, right? You've quoted from a number of statistics, and I know you work closely with Gallup, that business leaders are some of the most trusted members of our society. And when you look at the toxic partisanship, the idea that corporate America that has long-term interests in the future is kind of a ballast that can kind of hold things together. So there's a sense right now that we need corporations to kind of provide a little bit of balance in some of these discussions. There's an argument now, though, that we should make them do it, right? So I think the key questions around ESG are these voluntary opportunities for companies to express their interests and promote their brand, or should the government start to actually require mandatory reporting on all types of issues? And I think the question that you raised in your book at one point is where does the green scam come into this? I mean, how do you see the role of government in making sure that the kind of good intentions of corporations are in fact anchored in evidence?
Well, there's a lot of corporate irresponsibility out there. One of the things that you try to do that I think about a lot is find that balance between entrepreneurship and capitalism on one hand and regulation on the other hand. There was a time when people used to say companies ought to get out of the way. They have no social understanding. They ought to just pay their taxes, they ought to give money to nonprofits, and they ought to just go about their business. And now the pendulum has swung, and now we say no, companies need to be involved at every step along the way, and of course that requires more regulation, more reporting. And so how do you find that middle? How do you find that balance? And that's what we're constantly striving to do. And I think that BPC is key to this. I mean, I'm proud to be on the board of BPC Action because here's an organization, and I don't mean to be too flattering here, but here's an organization that not just works on big policy issues, but takes them out into the marketplace and sells them. And this is what we need. We need all three sectors working together: government, civil society, and of course, business. We're never going to get the thing right. We're never going to get the pendulum in the middle. We're never going to get the right balance, but we have to keep striving for it. And I'm a strong believer in capitalism. I am a capitalist. And when I talk to these MBA students, I can tell you they are as well. But they see capitalism differently today than we did back in my day. And what they say is, I want purpose as well as a paycheck. I want to be proud of my company. I don't just want to take home a paycheck. And that's causing change as well.
So when you talk to your students, I think you have made the kind of the Gen Z point, right? That purpose is now a real premium for folks. How are they also balancing, though, student debt, just the incredibly challenging work environment? I mean, are there opportunities, as you see your Georgetown students, who are clearly a very talented, elite group of folks? Are they finding their ability to navigate into the economy and achieve those kind of multiple goals?
Well, yes and no. These students, these MBA students that I work with, they've been out in the real world for 5 or 6 or 7 years, and then they come back for their MBAs. So they've been beat up in the real world, and they come back with a certain amount of realism. But at the same time, young people tend to be idealistic. And they say things to me like this: I have a lot of student debt. I want to pay it off. I want to have a family. I want to have a good career, but I do not want to lose my sense of purpose. And this is what they strive for. The other day, a student said, or not a student, but an alumna said to me, she said, I am so lucky. I have a good job and a good supervisor. Now imagine, Jason, to have a good job and a good supervisor. I mean, that's not too much to ask for, right? And so they're searching. They're searching as they go along. And one of the threads of the book of my book, Good Business, is that no matter where you are, for whomever you work, wherever you are in your career, starting out like these young people or mid-career or late career, you can make a difference. You can make a positive social difference. You can make a dent in the universe. And Dan Glickman likes to say, when one door closes, another door opens, but you got to be standing by the door. And that's what I try to tell these students. You've got to strive. You got to keep working at it. Never settle for mediocre.
That's a sage advice from BPC's resident philosopher. And I will note, Bill, that you seem to have a knack for that. I think the choices you've made at critical junctures to leave very good jobs is something that I've certainly think is unusual. And I guess the example for your students is important. So I think everyone should really appreciate that kind of demonstration of career courage.
Well, thank you for saying that. I believe in renewal. What I believe in is do your best, work as hard as you can, and then move on. Give somebody else a chance. So that's my philosophy.
All right, I'm going to turn now to some of the questions from the audience. I must admit they're in no particular order, but then here's a nice one. What is the very best and very worst professional decision you've ever made?
Oh boy.
Obviously, metaphor, but something that you're particularly proud of and something that you obviously found challenging in hindsight.
Well, the biggest mistake I think I've ever made, and I do talk about it in the book, was back in the days of fighting for national tobacco control legislation. We had reached this settlement with the tobacco industry, and then everybody piled on. the Congress did, the administration did. They all wanted to show how tough they were on tobacco. So the tobacco industry went to the National Press Club and said, Washington is crazy. We made a deal and now they're backing out. So we're quitting this deal and we're going to kill it. And I said to myself, there's no way they can kill this deal. We've got the administration behind us. We've got Congress. We've got the public. What I should have said was, we need to fight this harder. I should have gone back to Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, our benefactor, and at the time their CEO, Steve Schroeder, and I should have said, Steve, I need another $50 million. I didn't do that. And we lost. We lost by a hair's breadth, but we lost that national legislation. That was the biggest mistake I made.
And among the many, many good decisions.
Well, I don't
something
know.
Non-obvious.
Pardon me?
Yeah, it can be something non-obvious. Something in retrospect.
Non-obvious. Okay. Well, I lost a job that I really, really wanted. I wanted to be the CEO of CARE. And for a variety of reasons, I talk about it in the book, I was not chosen. And I was in the deepest funk that you can imagine. And my wife, who's my great partner, said to me, look, you did your best, get over it. And my best decision was I did get over it. I got over it. I started the campaign for tobacco-free kids, and everything went up from there.
So another question, which I'm going to kind of paraphrase, is that much of what you talk about are big companies, Unilever and Delta. How does this trickle down to the small companies, which are actually the majority of businesses in America? Where do you draw the line in terms of that kind of public obligation and just that obligation to a smaller 15, 20 person enterprise?
Well, I actually think that doing well by doing good is probably easier for a smaller company than a really big company. And I've been involved in small companies. We started Porto Novelli with 4 people. So I think that you can be more agile. You can serve your customers well, your clients, your employees. I talk to these Georgetown MBAs, and you talk to 5 of them and you get 6 ideas for startups. So these startups and these small companies are everywhere. And I do believe that, that they are the future. Not all of them succeed. I get ideas every day from students and from alumni and saying, what do you think of this? But I think that small companies can be a powerful force. I love small companies. I wish if I were starting over, I'd go start one.
You start a lot of small companies that became big companies, Bill, which I think is something that we all should respect. The other question I just picked up, which kind of goes back a little bit to the question about just the partisanship that is now kind of seeping into our society. And the question essentially says that, the politics of corporate America seem to have changed. For years, you could just assume that, big corporations were essentially supporting Republican candidates. And if you watch the last couple of weeks, we have Senator McConnell basically telling these companies to, stick to their knitting and get their nose out of policy conversations. Do you see this kind of evolution in corporate thinking resulting in a consequential change in kind of political alignment?
Well, I do, but I think it's bigger than just corporate involvement in the political alignment. I think our political parties are shifting. I mean, if you look at the Republican Party today, it's nothing like it was 20 years ago. Companies were always more comfortable, I think, or usually more comfortable on the Republican side. And now that's changing. And I do think that the contest, if you will, to align with corporations and for corporations to align with parties is all changing very, very rapidly. And, I think this is for the better.
Yeah, probably about time for about 2 more questions. One's a question around diversity in leadership. It basically is saying that there is still a dramatic lack of non-white CEOs. And, do you think corporations are doing everything they can be to be kind of building a talent pool for diverse leadership?
I do think they are. Not all companies, of course. but I think that there's a very strong business case for diversity. If you're gonna be a company and you're gonna serve clients and customers and so forth, you're gonna do better if you have diverse ideas in your management on your management team. If you all think alike, you're not going to really do as well as you can. The second thing is that you want a company to reflect the business that you're in and the corporate and the customers and the clients that you serve. When I was at AARP or anywhere else, I used to say, we want this organization to reflect the face of America. And yeah, it's the right thing to do, but it's way more than that. There's a very strong business case for diversity.
So I think I'm gonna claim the final question. And again, Bill, just based on the number of stops along your career, I think it is quite profound that you are now spending time educating and sharing with future leaders. But what's next for Novelli? Is Georgetown the final stop, or you have some other hobbies in mind that you're interested in sharing?
Well, I'm not ready for any final stops. I'm working on several things right now that I consider really important. So one is I'm working with a group that's trying to get the Biden administration and the Congress to double the budget on science and technology over the next 5 years. If we can do that, we're going to solve a lot of the problems that we're faced with, and we're going to be more internationally competitive. The second thing, as you know, I work on advanced illness and end-of-life care.
Yeah.
And there's probably no more topical issue in this country. There's a big gap between what people want when they're seriously ill and what we give them. So those are two areas that I'm really focused on. And I've got a couple of others in the works. I'm working with a group that's called the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health. What are we going to do about climate change? And I say in the book, this is our biggest threat. If we're going to pass this country on to the next generation, we've got to do something about climate change. So those three things are keeping me busy, and I'm not looking for anything more to work on.
Well, let me just say one or two more things about this book. The first is that it is exceptionally well written, which is not always the case for memoirs that I have had the pleasure of reading in the past. And the number of stories you tell. I mean, I guess I want to end with just asking you to comment on this a little bit. I think the importance of storytelling in leadership, whether it is business leadership or politics, felt like a thread that ran through this book. And as you have demonstrated such great storytelling prowess yourself, I wonder if you might just say a few words on that as we wind this down.
Well, you're really kind to say that. I am a big proponent of storytelling. But Jason, storytelling today, whether it's on NPR or at a sales meeting or at a conference or whatever, most stories are to warm up a crowd or to be liked or whatever, but they're not strategic. And so my thought is that we need strategic narratives. We need great stories to go along with data and to go along with evidence. And if we can tell great stories that are on strategy, I really think we can move mountains.
Well, Bill Novelli, you are one of nature's best people. And while everything you have done seems obvious in the rearview mirror, the kind of strategic courage along the way, I think, is really exceptional. And so I have enjoyed this book, and I encourage others to pick it up, and hope we can get back together in a few months and talk some more.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.